The heaviest feeling you've ever encountered during inner work was a sign you were closer than you've ever been. That wall of dread, that tightening in your chest when you tried to hold a new assumption about yourself, you interpreted it as proof that the old story was true. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why resistance intensifies at the threshold of transformation, and why the moment you want to quit is the moment the shift is already underway. Think about the last time you sat with an affirmation that contradicted your lived experience. Maybe you repeated, "I am wealthy," while your bank account screamed otherwise. Maybe you declared, "I am loved," while sleeping alone, and something inside you clenched. A voice felt like truth. It felt like the deepest, most honest part of you cutting through the delusion. It was your subconscious mind doing its job. Your subconscious operates like a thermostat. Once a belief is installed, through repetition, emotion, and lived experience, the subconscious treats it as the correct temperature for your life. Every thought, every assumption, every habitual reaction gets measured against that setting. When you try to raise the temperature by adopting a new belief, the system kicks in to cool you back down. The resistance you feel is the cooling mechanism activating. The tightness in your stomach, the flood of contradictory thoughts, the sudden exhaustion that hits right when you sit down to do your mental work, all of it is regulation. The thermostat protecting its setting. Neville Goddard spoke about this with striking clarity. He taught that the subconscious mind accepts what is impressed upon it through feeling and repetition, and that it will faithfully outpicture whatever belief is most deeply held. But he also acknowledged what happens in the gap, that uncomfortable stretch between deciding on a new assumption and having it harden into fact. The old assumption fights back. Your morning affirmation feels hollow by noon. Your visualized scene crumbles under the weight of a single phone call delivering bad news. And you think, if this were really working, wouldn't it feel easier that keeps people stuck for years? Ease has nothing to do with effectiveness. The subconscious resists change precisely because the new belief is registering. A thought that posed no threat to the existing programming would slide off without friction. You'd feel nothing. The fact that you feel everything, the doubt, the fear, the almost physical urge to stop, means the new pattern is pressing against the old one hard enough to trigger a defense response. Consider what happens when someone begins a physical training program after years of being sedentary. The first few sessions produce soreness so intense it feels like injury. Every muscle screams that this is wrong, that the body was fine the way it was, that this new demand is dangerous. A person who interprets that soreness as damage will quit. A person who understands it as adaptation will keep going. Within weeks, the same exercises that once felt like punishment become routine. The body adjusted. The resistance was the adjustment. Your subconscious follows the same principle, except the soreness is emotional. It shows up as anxiety when you imagine yourself successful, as guilt when you feel deserving, as a strange sadness when you picture the life you've been affirming. These emotions carry a message, and the message is always the same. This new identity conflicts with the one currently installed. The subconscious doesn't evaluate whether the new belief is better or worse. It only knows it's different, and different triggers defense. Here's where most people make the critical error. They treat the resistance as a signal to investigate the old belief further. They dig into their past, analyze their childhood, catalog every experience that created the limitation. They believe understanding the origin of the wound will heal it. But the subconscious doesn't release a belief because you understand where it came from. It releases a belief when a new one is impressed with greater consistency and emotional intensity than the old one. Archaeology of the wound can go on forever. Impression of the new state is what actually shifts the inner landscape. Goddard called this living in the end. You occupy the feeling of the wish fulfilled so persistently that the subconscious eventually accepts it as the new baseline. The old thermostat setting gets overwritten. But, and this is where depth matters, persistently means through the resistance, through the days when your senses mock you, through the mornings when the old feeling is waiting for you before your eyes even open. A practical way to work with this, when the resistance shows up during your inner work, label it. Say to yourself, silently, "This is the thermostat." Give it a name that strips away its authority, because resistance borrows the voice of truth. It sounds rational. It presents evidence. It reminds you of every past failure with the precision of a prosecutor. And if you engage it on those terms, arguing with the evidence, trying to convince yourself it's wrong, you've already lost. You're debating the old programming on its home court. Instead, acknowledge the sensation without engaging the content. The tight chest, the racing thoughts, the heaviness. Let them exist while you continue holding the new assumption. You're training the subconscious the same way you'd train a muscle, through sustained tension held long enough for adaptation to begin. The feeling of resistance and the process of change are the same event experienced from two different angles. One angle says, "This is breaking." The other says, "This is building." There's a stage in this work that almost nobody talks about. It comes after the initial excitement of discovering these principles, and before the manifestation shows up in the physical world. Goddard described the journey from desire to fulfillment as a bridge of incidents, a series of natural-seeming events that connect your current reality to your imagined one. But while the bridge is being built, you often feel worse than before you started. The old reality hasn't changed yet. The new belief hasn't fully taken root. You're suspended between two versions of yourself, and the ground beneath both feels unstable. This middle passage is where 90% of people abandon the work. They interpret the instability as failure. They assume that if the technique were working, they'd feel confident and certain. Instead, they feel raw and exposed, like someone who demolished the walls of their house before the new structure was ready. That rawness is the subconscious in transition. The old programming is losing coherence. The new programming hasn't yet solidified. The discomfort between those 2 points is the actual territory of transformation. You've felt this before in smaller ways. The disorientation of the first week at a new job, when your old professional identity doesn't fit anymore, but the new one hasn't formed yet. The strange grief that comes with getting exactly what you wanted, because receiving it meant releasing the familiar ache of wanting. Change, real, structural, identity-level change, always passes through a corridor of discomfort. The corridor is the proof, the evidence that you're moving between rooms. So what do you do when the resistance hits its peak? When every cell in your body is screaming to go back to the familiar belief, the comfortable imitation, the known version of yourself? You stay, quietly, without drama. You hold your new assumption the way you'd hold a candle in wind. Cupped hands, steady breath, patient. You don't fight the wind, you protect the flame. The subconscious needs repetition and emotional saturation to accept new programming. Every session where you hold the new state, despite the resistance, is another impression on the subconscious mind. And impressions accumulate. They build pressure against the old belief from the inside, until one day, often without warning, the old belief simply gives way. Goddard described this moment as the Sabbath, the point where the work feels done, where you no longer need to convince yourself because the new assumption feels natural. The thermostat has been reset. The resistance dissolves because there's nothing left to resist. The new belief is the baseline now. The people who experience the most dramatic resistance are often the ones closest to the most dramatic breakthroughs. The intensity of the defense is proportional to the magnitude of the change being attempted. A small adjustment, believing you deserve a slightly better parking spot, barely registers. But believing you deserve a completely different life, a different self-concept, a different relationship with abundance or love or purpose, that triggers every defense mechanism the subconscious has. The bigger the shift, the louder the resistance. And the louder the resistance, the more certain you can be that the shift is real. Your subconscious has been running the same program for years, maybe decades. It built your identity around those beliefs, constructed your perception of reality to match them, filtered every experience through them. When you decide to change the core program, you're asking the entire system to reorganize itself around a new center of gravity. The system will resist that reorganization with everything it has. Every doubt, every fear, every realistic objection is the system fighting to maintain its architecture. Let it fight. Hold your ground. The architecture is already shifting beneath the noise. That tightness in your chest the next time you affirm something your senses deny, feel it fully. Then keep going. The flame doesn't need the wind to stop, it only needs your hands to stay steady.